The invitation was born out of a careless laugh and a restless evening, the kind of moment that seemed harmless when wrapped in wealth and privilege. Adrian Vale sat alone in his penthouse office, city lights spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows like a sea of glittering promises. Below him, the world moved with urgency, but up here time bent to his will. He had already approved million-dollar donations, skimmed through business proposals, and confirmed attendance for the most exclusive charity gala of the year. Names filled the digital guest list: politicians, investors, celebrities, people who wore power as easily as tailored suits. Boredom crept in, subtle but dangerous. His eyes wandered from the screen to the reflection in the glass, then further, toward the quiet rhythm of footsteps behind him. Elena was working, as she always did at this hour, dusting shelves with careful precision, adjusting objects so they aligned perfectly, never disturbing the silence unless spoken to. She had been part of his life for 7 years, present in every corner of his home, yet somehow unseen. To Adrian, she was reliable background, like the hum of the building itself. As a joke sparked in his mind, he smirked, tapping his fingers against the desk. What would happen, he wondered, if someone like her stepped into a world that wasn't meant for her? The thought amused him more than it should have. Without much reflection, he typed her name into the guest list, the contrast making him chuckle softly. He imagined her confusion, perhaps embarrassment, maybe even fear. It would be something to laugh about later with his friends. He printed the invitation on thick ivory paper edged in gold and left it on the marble counter where she would surely see it. The next morning, sunlight flooded the penthouse, illuminating polished surfaces and expensive art. Elena noticed the envelope immediately. It looked out of place among grocery lists and reminders, too formal, too important. She picked it up carefully, as though it might crumble in her hands. Adrian watched from across the room, pretending to scroll through his phone while studying her reaction. She read it slowly, once, then again, her face calm, betraying nothing. He expected a nervous laugh, a question, maybe a quick excuse. Instead, she simply folded the invitation and slipped it into her pocket. "You don't have to take it seriously," Adrian said casually, finally breaking the silence. "It was just a joke." Elena looked at him then, really looked at him, her eyes steady and thoughtful. She nodded once, not arguing, not smiling, not offended, just accepting the words as they were. That lack of reaction unsettled him more than any protest would have. He shrugged it off, convinced the matter was over, unaware that something deep had been stirred. That evening, Elena returned to her small apartment on the edge of the city, a place defined by simplicity and quiet. She placed the invitation on her modest kitchen table and sat across from it for a long time. The gold lettering seemed almost ironic against the worn wood. As the city noises filtered through the thin windows, memories surfaced uninvited. She remembered chandeliers brighter than these words, halls filled with music, the sound of her mother's laughter echoing across marble floors. There had been a time when invitations like this were ordinary, when elegance was not something she borrowed, but something she lived. That life had ended abruptly, buried beneath loss, legal battles, and choices made to survive rather than to shine. Becoming a housekeeper had not been a fall from grace to her. It had been a refuge. It allowed her to disappear, to rebuild quietly, to observe humanity without being consumed by it. She had learned the power of silence, the strength of humility, and the discipline of self-respect. Now, this single piece of paper threatened to reopen doors she had carefully closed. She stood, walked to the mirror, and studied her reflection. Years of restraint had not erased her poise. Her eyes still carried knowledge, and her posture still held confidence, even in worn clothes. The joke, she realized, did not define her. How she responded to it would. She folded the invitation again, more deliberately this time, and placed it in a drawer alongside documents from her past she rarely touched. A decision settled within her, not driven by pride or anger, but by clarity. She would attend, not to prove a point, not to embarrass anyone, but to honor the woman she had once been and the woman she had become. That night, she began to plan quietly, calculating expenses, reaching out to an old acquaintance she trusted, choosing dignity over resentment. Days passed, and Adrian thought little of it. To him, the gala loomed large with expectations, deals to be made, appearances to maintain. Elena continued her work as usual, efficient and composed, offering no hint of what she intended. Yet beneath the routine, something subtle shifted. She moved with renewed purpose, as if preparing for a performance no one else knew about. Adrian noticed nothing. He was too accustomed to assuming that people stayed within the boundaries he imagined for them. The joke remained a joke in his mind, harmless and forgotten. But somewhere between crystal chandeliers and a modest apartment, between arrogance and resolve, the first scene of an unforgettable night had already been set into motion. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in elegance and expectation, the city glowing as if it, too, had dressed for the occasion. The grand hall stood at the heart of it all, its wide stone steps lined with soft lights and cameras waiting for familiar faces. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung like captured constellations, scattering brilliance across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. The air carried the scent of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, and every voice seemed carefully measured, every laugh rehearsed. Adrian Vale entered to a ripple of recognition, greeted with admiration and practiced warmth. He wore confidence as naturally as his tailored tuxedo, exchanging handshakes, compliments, and promises with effortless ease. The gala was his world, a place where he belonged without question. As he accepted a glass of champagne, he overheard playful remarks about his guest list, someone teasing him about a mystery invite. Adrian smiled, the joke faintly resurfacing in his mind. He dismissed it with a wave, unconcerned, certain it would amount to nothing more than a passing laugh. Music drifted through the hall, a soft orchestral arrangement that blended seamlessly with the hum of conversation. Guests formed clusters, discussing investments, art collections, and charitable gestures that doubled as public statements. Every detail had been curated to perfection, from the lighting to the seating arrangements, all designed to reflect influence and control. Adrian stood near the center of the room, basking in the familiarity of admiration, when a subtle shift rippled through the atmosphere. At first, it was barely noticeable, a pause here, a lowered voice there. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened. The sound cut through the music like a held breath finally released. Heads turned in unison, conversations faltered, and the room seemed to tilt toward the entrance. Elena stepped inside, and time fractured. The woman who entered bore little resemblance to the housekeeper known for quiet efficiency and plain uniforms. She wore a gown of deep sapphire that moved like water with every step, elegant and commanding without excess. The fabric caught the light, reflecting confidence rather than extravagance. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, her expression calm, her posture straight, as if she had walked into rooms like this all her life. She did not rush, nor did she hesitate. Each step was deliberate, grounded, assured. The murmur of the crowd dissolved into silence. Eyes widened, brows lifted, and curiosity replaced certainty. No one whispered yet. It was as though the room needed a moment to recalibrate. Adrian's smile faded, his glass stilled in his hand. The joke returned to him in full clarity, no longer amusing, no longer distant. He felt the strange sensation of being unprepared, of losing control over a situation he had assumed was trivial. This was not confusion on Elena's face. This was presence. She met his gaze across the room, her eyes steady, revealing neither triumph nor resentment. There was no challenge in them, only quiet strength. The distance between them felt suddenly vast, filled with unspoken realizations. As she moved forward, the crowd instinctively parted, creating a path as natural as it was unplanned. People stepped aside not out of politeness, but out of instinctive respect. Whispers began to rise, cautious and curious. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why have we never seen her before? A woman known for her sharp judgments leaned toward her companion, confusion evident. A businessman frowned, recalculating assumptions. Elena acknowledged gentle compliments with a nod, responding to brief greetings with grace, her voice calm and warm when she spoke. There was no trace of nervousness, no sign of someone out of place. Adrian watched as influential figures engaged her in conversation, drawn by something they could not quite name. She spoke thoughtfully, listening more than she spoke, offering insights that revealed depth rather than display. Her words carried weight not because they demanded attention, but because they deserved it. As minutes passed, The initial shock transformed into fascination. The gala resumed its rhythm, but with a subtle shift, as though a new presence had altered the balance of the room. Adrian felt exposed, his earlier carelessness now magnified under the chandeliers. He realized that in inviting her as a joke, he had underestimated not only her, but the entire world beyond his assumptions. Elena did not seek him out, nor did she avoid him. She existed independently, her confidence self-contained. Watching her, Adrian experienced an unfamiliar discomfort, a quiet reckoning that unsettled his sense of superiority. The orchestra swelled gently, conversation returned in softened tones, and yet nothing was the same. The room had witnessed an unspoken transformation. A woman meant to be invisible had claimed visibility without asking for it. The joke had walked in wearing dignity, and it had frozen an entire room not with spectacle, but with truth. As the evening unfolded, the initial shock softened into a steady undercurrent of curiosity, and Elena found herself moving through the grand hall as though guided by an invisible current. People who rarely looked beyond status now studied her with genuine interest, drawn not just by her appearance, but by the calm authority she carried. She accepted conversations without rushing them, her presence unhurried in a room where everyone else seemed desperate to be important. A well-known philanthropist asked about her perspective on charitable work, expecting polite generalities. Elena answered with quiet conviction, speaking about education not as an abstract cause, but as a living force that could rescue generations from silence and fear. Her words carried experience, not theory, and the listener found himself nodding before he realized it. Nearby, an art collector mentioned a painting recently acquired at an auction, assuming admiration. Elena smiled and gently referenced the artist's early influences, correcting a misconception without arrogance. Surprise flickered across the collector's face, followed by respect. One by one, assumptions dissolved, replaced by something deeper. Adrian watched these exchanges from a short distance, his unease growing with every passing minute. The room that had always obeyed him now felt subtly out of his control. He noticed how people leaned closer when Elena spoke, how their expressions softened, how laughter around her was genuine rather than performative. He told himself it was temporary, a novelty that would fade, yet a quiet voice inside him whispered otherwise. Gathering his composure, he approached her, aware for the first time of the imbalance he had created. "I'm glad you came," he said, the words sounding inadequate even to his own ears. Elena turned toward him, her expression open but measured. "Thank you for the invitation," she replied simply. There was no accusation in her tone, no reminder of the joke. That absence of bitterness unsettled him more than anger would have. He searched for something clever to say, some way to reclaim ease, but found himself at a loss. They stood beneath the chandelier, light reflecting off crystal and glass, as if the room itself were listening. Adrian attempted humor, then sincerity, then silence. Finally, he admitted, haltingly, that he hadn't expected this. Elena met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Expectation can be a comfortable cage," she said quietly. "It keeps us from seeing what is already there." Her words landed softly but firmly, leaving no room for defense. Around them, conversations ebbed and flowed, yet a small circle seemed to form, people drawn by an unspoken sense that something meaningful was occurring. Adrian felt exposed, as though his carefully constructed image had cracked just enough to let truth through. As the night progressed, Elena was invited to join a table reserved for distinguished donors and speakers. She hesitated for only a moment before accepting, not out of eagerness, but out of grace. Seated among people who usually measured worth in numbers and titles, she listened intently, contributing when it mattered. She spoke of rebuilding communities quietly, of empowering individuals without demanding recognition. Her perspective was refreshing, almost disarming. Some listened out of politeness, others out of genuine interest, but all were affected. Adrian noticed how the atmosphere shifted around her, becoming less rigid, more human. He realized that her years of service had not diminished her. They had sharpened her understanding of people in ways wealth never could. During a pause in the program, a host announced a surprise benefactor who had chosen to remain unnamed, whose contribution would fund scholarships for underprivileged students. Applause filled the hall, polite at first, then sincere. Elena did not look toward the stage or seek acknowledgement. She lowered her gaze briefly, as if honoring a private promise. Adrian watched her, a realization dawning with quiet force. The woman he had underestimated was not here to be seen. She was here to give something lasting. In that moment, admiration replaced discomfort, and guilt followed close behind. Later, on the terrace overlooking the city, Adrian finally spoke with honesty stripped of performance. He apologized, not theatrically, but with humility he rarely allowed himself to show. He acknowledged the carelessness of his joke and the narrowness of his assumptions. Elena listened without interruption, the city lights reflecting in her eyes like distant stars. When he finished, she nodded gently. "We all wear roles," she said. "Some are chosen, some are survived. What matters is whether we let them define us completely." There was forgiveness in her tone, but also truth. She did not offer absolution as a gift. She offered it as a shared responsibility. The night drew toward its end, guests departing with lingering glances and quiet conversations about the woman who had shifted the room without raising her voice. Adrian remained still for a moment, watching Elena re-enter the hall with the same composed grace she had carried all evening. He understood then that the joke had revealed something essential, not about her, but about him. The gala would be remembered not for its glamour or its guests, but for the quiet power of a woman who reminded everyone present that dignity does not announce itself. It simply arrives, undeniable, and changes the air around it. The night slowly loosened its grip on the city as the gala drew to a close, the grand hall emptying of laughter, perfume, and carefully rehearsed smiles. Chauffeurs waited outside while the last guests lingered, reluctant to leave a moment that felt unexpectedly significant. Elena stood near the entrance, thanking a few people who approached her with genuine warmth rather than curiosity. Compliments flowed, but she accepted them with the same quiet grace she had carried all evening, never allowing praise to inflate her sense of self. When she finally stepped outside, the cool air felt grounding, a reminder that life continued beyond chandeliers and marble floors. Adrian followed a few steps behind, his thoughts heavier than the night sky above them. For the first time in years, silence between them did not feel empty. It felt necessary. They stood beneath the glow of streetlights, the city humming softly around them. Adrian broke the quiet, not with charm or humor, but with reflection. He spoke about how easily he had mistaken wealth for understanding, how often he had reduced people to roles that made his world simpler. The confession was halting, stripped of the confidence that usually protected him. Elena listened, her expression thoughtful, allowing him the dignity of being heard. When he finished, she spoke calmly, explaining that her life had taught her the value of invisibility as much as visibility. Being unseen had allowed her to observe, to grow, to survive without bitterness. She did not resent her years of service. They had shaped her patience and deepened her compassion. What she rejected was the idea that a role defined a person's worth. Her words were not a lecture, but an offering, and Adrian felt their weight settle within him. The following morning, the penthouse felt different, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the lesson of the night before. Sunlight streamed across the marble floors, revealing not just luxury, but emptiness where meaning had been missing. Elena arrived as usual, composed and professional, her demeanor unchanged. She wore no trace of last night's splendor, yet something about her presence commanded new respect. Adrian greeted her with a sincerity that surprised them both. He asked her opinion on matters he had never thought to share, listened without interrupting, and accepted her insights with gratitude rather than dismissal. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Power, once displayed through distance, now expressed itself through attention. Word of the gala spread quickly through social circles, not as gossip, but as reflection. People spoke of the woman who had entered like royalty without claiming a throne, who had spoken of generosity without demanding applause. Invitations and inquiries followed. Opportunities presented themselves quietly, respectfully. Elena considered them carefully, declining some, accepting others that aligned with her values. She chose to support educational initiatives, to mentor quietly, to invest her energy where it could grow unseen but strong. She did not abandon her work abruptly. She transitioned thoughtfully, honoring commitments and closing chapters with grace. Adrian supported her choices without attempting to claim credit, understanding at last that true influence meant stepping back. Months passed, and the memory of that night matured into something more than astonishment. For Adrian, it became a turning point. He began to question the assumptions that had shaped his life, to see people not as accessories to his success, but as individuals with stories deeper than appearances. His philanthropy shifted from performative gestures to purposeful action. He listened more, spoke less, and learned the discipline of humility. Elena, in her quiet way, became a mirror that reflected both his flaws and his potential. Their relationship evolved into one built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy, defined by honesty rather than convenience. For Elena, the gala was never about reclaiming a lost status or proving her worth to those who had underestimated her. It was a moment of alignment, where her past and present met without conflict. She understood that dignity did not require validation, but visibility could be used responsibly. She carried forward the lessons of service, patience, empathy, resilience, into spaces where they were often lacking. She moved between worlds with ease, not belonging entirely to any of them, and that freedom became her strength. Years later, the story would still be told, not as a tale of shock, but as a reminder. People would recall the night a joke revealed a truth, when a room full of power froze not because it was challenged, but because it was confronted with authenticity. They would speak of a woman who entered without announcing herself and left without seeking applause, yet changed the trajectory of lives around her. And somewhere within those stories lived a simple lesson: that greatness often walks quietly, that crowns are not always worn, and that the measure of a person is found not in the role they occupy, but in the grace with which they rise above it.